Hi, my name is Denise Bittler, and I'm the owner of Resume Interview Success. And today I'm here with Laura Johnson, owner of LLEJ Careers. We are also co-founders of the Career Experts Group, which is a joint venture of master career practitioners and personal branding strategists. Our group shares one mission, and that is to guide and support individuals at all stages of their career journey, whether they're new college graduates or C-suite executives. Each month, we publish an information-packed newsletter called Your Career, Your Future, where we provide the latest in career and hiring trends, insights, tips, and tricks to help you find your next job or climb the career ladder or make the most of your current position. Our November newsletter celebrates National Career Development Month, and we thought, what better way to celebrate than to bring back Arthur Hughes for part 2 of our Applicant Tracking System series. Arthur is an executive client partner with Heller DeLand Group, specializing in targeted executive search and workforce transition services in the automotive, aerospace, and other manufacturing sectors nationwide. He also provides leadership and career transition training and development assistance to high potential individuals who are seeking to build new skills and move forward in their careers quickly. Arthur is also on the faculty of the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and today, in part 2 of our 2-part ATS series, Arthur answers some key questions that are on the minds of our readers regarding applicant tracking systems and recruiters. Welcome, Arthur. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be back with both of you.
Great to have you back. So I'm just going to jump right into the questions. And the first one is what to use for your resume when you're uploading your resume into the system. Should it be a PDF if that's required? If it's not required, can you use a Word document, or is PDF better? And then what about Google Docs? Where do they fit in or should not fit in?
Okay, yeah, this is a fairly typical question for folks. I think the simple answer, honestly, is to follow the specific guidelines of whatever the company tells you to do. And most of the time, they'll give you, the type of format that they're looking for, whether it's PDF or Word. Beyond that, if there isn't a specific direction, or if they give you the option, generally speaking, it's going to be safest to submit it as a Word document, which is a doc file DOC or a docx docx file. And the reason for that is just sort of the reliability and consistency of the submission. The whole purpose of a ATS or applicant tracking system is to pull your information into their electronic system. And what it does is it takes your electronic document and attempts to read it and pull in all of the relevant information from your resume into their system so that you become a profile is created for you in their system. Where that runs into some problems is that it depends on the format of your submission as to how well that ATS system will parse that information in. So Word documents are typically the safest. Those are what most ATS systems are trained on to pull in information. PDF is the second best option. And quite frankly, that's the one that is most often requested, at least that I've seen. And what's nice about a PDF is that it assures that your format of the resume is actually maintained in the electronic document. So if they were to actually print that document, it's going to look like you want it to be done. However, sometimes PDFs get created and they become text that will either be a text field, so they're searchable, or they might be actually created so that the information comes in as an image. And so if you're not really careful about how that is saved on your computer, it could be that it's going to be saved as an image. And then if that's the case, it won't be parsed at all. So PDF isn't a guarantee that it will work, although it usually is pretty reliable. One way to check that actually is to go to your PDF document and start to try to highlight the text. If you can actually highlight the text in that document, that will most likely mean that the information in your PDF is searchable. If you try to select it and it doesn't get, selected, that means it's probably been saved as an image instead of text, and it's probably not searchable. So that's just a real quick way you can actually check it. But that'll give you sort of a good heads up, at least on those two formats.
Hey, Laura and I both kind of had as the same kind of aha look when I had never thought of that, never heard that. That's such a great tidbit.
Yeah, it happens occasionally with most modern systems. If you're saving it in Word and you click on Save As and you choose PDF, that's usually the most reliable way to do it. But what some people will do is they will export that document into something online, for instance, to convert it to a PDF. And in those cases, you're not quite sure how it's going to be treated, how it's going to be handled. And in some of those cases, it could actually get saved, as I said, as an image as opposed to researchable text. So, that's a little bit of a tip for some people. Like I said, probably not going to hurt most, but occasionally it might pop up as a problem. And then, with respect to other documents, you mentioned Google Docs, Laura. Google Docs is a great collaboration tool, but the problem with it is that it doesn't upload its information in such a way that all ATS systems are going to be able to read it properly. And one of the problems we have that we talked about in our first part is that there's well over 200 systems out there, ATS systems that companies use. And not only that, there's a lot of version control. So even if you have two of the same system, one might be a version 1 versus version 5, things of that sort. And we just don't know what capabilities an ATS system will have. So as soon as we start to go off the plan a little bit, so to speak, we're just not sure how the ATS system is going to treat it. So it's always best to be conservative when you're doing this. And in that case, using a standard document. So Google Docs can be a problem. We didn't mention it, but Mac users who use Pages to create their documents and they try to upload those are also a problem for ATS systems too.
Oh, that's great. Really great information. So you talked about parsing the applicant tracking system, parsing the data. And I know, back before I was running my own business, I had applied to some jobs and some applicant tracking systems. You'd upload the resume. And then it would come up and say, okay, here's the data. This is what we did with the data. Here's how we parsed it. Other times there's like, thanks for applying. See you later. So, is that a function of the system or how that company has the system set up? And, if it just says, thanks, see you later, do you have any way of knowing whether it parsed the data correctly?
Great question. You sort of answered the question in your question in a way. So yes, it does have to do with the individual ATS system and how they've set it up and how they've set up their application process. So I think if you find that you don't have the opportunity to review your data as you're starting to submit, what I would suggest you do if you haven't hit submit by that point is perhaps to back out of the process and actually take a different look at your resume. You should probably do this anyway. I mean, there are tools out there that you can check to see how your resume is viewed. So there are a couple of things that you could do potentially for that. But most systems these days, Denise, will have the capability for you to review the information. And you'll be able to kind of edit it as you go. And obviously that's the most convenient approach, because then you can check your data as you're uploading it, right? If not, it can be a little bit of a risk because you have no idea how the information is parsed into the system. So actually, podcasts like this, conversations like this, and career coaches like both of you who try to learn much more about how this process works, we can educate our candidates, the people who will eventually become candidates for companies. We can educate them on how to make sure they understand how the process works. So the more knowledge we can get out there, the better that is. What I will tell you, though, is things are getting better, and we'll talk more about this probably about with generative AI and other tools that come into play now, and the more sophistication that's being applied to the ATS systems. a lot of the problems with that have gone away to a certain degree, but there's always a risk of misparsed information or things going wrong with that upload process.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about continuing to be learning and aware, and focusing on what's happening and what's changing, because it is changing so fast. I've had a couple of clients in the past who are very concerned about security and privacy and don't want to use online systems. And are these secure? So are ATS systems secure? What happens with their privacy?
I think, ultimately companies are extremely aware of the issues of data privacy. So particularly with companies that are global in nature, Europe, for instance, has extremely strict rules around data privacy and how they manage data. And because of that, companies have, particularly, like I said, global companies, they'll use the same kind of process and have the same kind of rules worldwide that apply to all of their organizations typically. In addition to that, certain states are becoming much more focused on data privacy as well. California is a good example of that too. So what you're finding is companies are either willingly or forced to by regulation actually starting to watch this information much more closely. In addition to that, cyber attacks or cybersecurity hacks, things of that sort, have become much more prevalent. So companies are much more aware and diligent about keeping all of the information safe. HR systems are one of the most secure systems of an organization for lots of obvious reasons. So making an application into a company is very safe if done the proper way. Okay, so this is where I know a lot of people are concerned of using job boards, LinkedIn, and things of that sort to apply. One of the things that I tend to recommend to people is that if they are submitting electronically their information, they should go through the company system as opposed to LinkedIn or Indeed if they can. Right. So one of the things you can do is if you see a job posting on one of these job boards, you can take some of the text out of the job posting and copy it and then do a Google search on that and see if it pops up, on another search. So you might be able to find it that way. You can obviously go to the company. The reason I did the copy and paste approach is sometimes these jobs are posted confidentially, so you don't know who the company is. But they actually do post the position sometimes. So you can kind of find where it is by doing that as well. But generally speaking, if you're using a company hosted system, you're going to be very secure. So you don't have to worry about putting your private information in. One thing I would tell people, though, is, there's so many scams out there and people are quite desperate for jobs. So if you find that a system is asking you for your personal information, and what I mean by that, it's things like your social security number, your driver's license number, things of that sort, I would definitely say do not put that information in, stop and actually call the company and talk to them about it. Because if that's the case, I would be just a little bit suspicious of what they're going to use the information for. Most companies won't ask you for that kind of information until you are very far into the process, or sometimes not even until you actually receive a job offer. So if you're being asked that information ahead of that time, even before perhaps you've even talked to somebody, absolute red flag. So you just have to be mindful. It's like anything else, right? We're not going to give that information over the phone or anything like that. I would basically treat this in the same way.
That's a great point. I know, because people tend to say, well, it's an applicant tracking system, so I can trust what they're asking me for. And yeah, that's a great heads up.
I mean, most of the time when you're applying, the only information you're giving them is your address and your phone number and your email, right? If someone's worried about that, then they really shouldn't be on social media because your information is out there. Trust me. But I do understand anything beyond that. Definitely take a cautious approach with.
That's great. Now, we kind of talked about this in our first interview. We've talked a little bit about it in this as well. But if you had to name say the top, we'll say top 5 ATS considerations when you're crafting your resume? What would your top 5 be?
So I'm going to use my answer to talk just about the ATS system. This might not be what I would say are the top 5 things for a resume. So I want to be clear about that, okay? Because the thing we're talking about with the ATS system is the mechanism by which you are added to a company's database and how they track you within the job search process, right? And your resume is that first document that represents you within that system. So I'm not talking about comparing a resume with another candidate at this point. So I just want to preface everything, my answer by saying that. So the first thing I would say that we have to do, and we sort of talked about it in an indirect way, is simple, clean formatting on your resume. So avoid things that are going to potentially give the ATS system a headache. And most ATS systems can handle a lot of different variations, but when we start to think about that complexity of how many systems are out there and whether systems have been upgraded to the most current versions and things of that sort, we have to remember that we almost have to work towards the lowest common denominator. So simplicity is best. We can't assume anything with these ATS systems. And we just want to be sure that we get in there and our information gets in there accurately, right? So in order to do that, I'll use the words that we'll need to dumb it down a little and just make it very simple. So avoiding complexity in it. So things like making sure we don't include information in the headers and the footers, not using graphics within here. The use of tables is okay in some cases, but if you don't really know how to use a table in Word very well, that could cause a problem. In addition, also using columns in a document can sometimes cause headaches. So it's usually better to stick to a standard resume format when you're submitting electronically. You can use the typical formatting tools within Word without much trouble. So shading you can use bold and italic fonts, things of that sort. That's not going to cause too much of a headache. It's just making sure you don't do anything that potentially could be unreadable by the ATS system, and that's where these kinds of things sometimes will give a little bit of a headache to them.
One of the things that I had heard, and we may have talked about this before. I'm lucky I can remember yesterday, much less 2 months ago, but saving your resume as a .txt to get a better idea of what the applicant tracking system will be able to read. So if you do have some kind of visual and you've moved behind the text versus, is that a valid exercise, or is that false? Does that give a false sense of security or comfort?
Yeah, no, I think it actually is a good approach to at least do a sort of a cursory check to see if it's readable or not. Okay. The way that you would do that, of course, in Word is to save it as a TXT file, like we talked about earlier. You could save it as a PDF as an option as well. And you reopen that file and just kind of see how it looks. Yeah, that's a good way to do a spot check. And I would say it's going to be reliable most of the time. Okay, so totally agree with that. The other thing you need to do is you also need to make sure that you have standard section headings. So some people want to get creative and they say about me, something like that. And when they're talking about their experience section or what I've done, something like that in their experience section. It's creative, but it also might confuse the ATS system. So the ATS system is going to be looking for headers that are fairly standard worded. You can be a little creative, but it's best to just keep it fairly simple and say experience or professional experience, education, skills, things of that sort, just to make sure that the ATS system recognizes the information that goes along with that header, and therefore it has a higher probability of being successful in bringing that information and putting it in the right place. So, that's a way of also keeping it simple as well to make sure you're doing this. File types we talked about. I think that's something that's obvious for this discussion as well. Templates, that is a very hot topic online, and using templates. My recommendation is to steer clear of them, not because they're not a great idea. It's just you don't know how they're programmed and how they're structured. So, if you run into one, there are professional templates out there that are perfect. But if you're not really adept at using Word and understanding how to manipulate a document and use formatting, those kinds of tools can get you into a little bit of hot water pretty quickly if you're not familiar with that. So use them carefully, I would say, and if possible, I would avoid them just to be on the safe side. In addition to that, one of the things we always talk about too is from a keyword perspective, making sure that the keywords you have in your resume are relevant to the position that you're applying to. So one of the things that ATS systems will sometimes do, not always, is they will score your resume based on the matches of keywords from the job description to your resume. So customizing your resume, which is good practice anyway, of course, right? Tailoring your resume to the position is important. But knowing that the purpose of, one of the purposes of an ATS system is actually to bring your information in, and some organizations will use it to score. So if that's the case, you do need to make sure the keywords do match up reasonably well.
Arthur, is it true that especially some of the newer, more advanced ATS systems actually have the capability to not only search for the keywords, but search for them in context so that they can identify when someone's doing a keyword dump versus including those keywords in quantifiable accomplishment bullets and things like that?
Yes, that's true. And as AI becomes much more integrated into these tools, Denise, then that is definitely going to continue to improve in terms of its level of accuracy and being able to figure that out. But as of now, it will look for keywords that are used in sentences. So if you just have them listed as skills, it may not give you, quote unquote, as good a score if you just got it listed as a list of skills. But it really has to do, with how the system is customized, how they use it, how they program it to be used to evaluate candidates. And ultimately, we just don't know because it's all kind of in this black box behind this curtain, right? So again, just keeping it simple and approaching this, to make sure that your information gets in, and taking some of these tips will get you into, 98, 99% of the time, you'll be pretty safe.
Good to know. Good to know. So often in companies, especially larger companies, clients will find more than one position that meets their background and meets their experience. How do recruiters feel about job applicants turning in multiple applications at one company?
Okay, it depends. So it can be I'll use the word double-edged sword in a way, with respect to how it can be perceived. And as usual, right, it's all based on how it hits an individual and whether or not they see it as, this person's just applying to a similar position, or they're desperate and they're looking for a job, right? So, the positive interpretations of it are that you have a very high interest in the organization. So it's somebody that you may be much more motivated and really excited about joining your company. So that could be a very positive thing. In addition to that, it might be somebody that has a background that is diverse. And because of that diversity, they might actually qualify for 2 different positions in an organization. So also that could be something that's viewed very positively, assuming that they do have that diversity of background and they do qualify for both of the positions or multiple positions that they've applied for. Where it goes sideways, of course, is if you're applying for positions, you're not customizing your resume or tailoring your resume to the role, and you're using the same resume to apply to different positions in the organization that might have different responsibilities. Then the negative connotations really start to crop up, right? So does the candidate not really know what they want to do? So a lack of clarity in their direction. Are they desperate, which is certainly an unfortunate but a possible scenario in this case too. But ultimately, if you do qualify for the position, apply for it. That's the end of that discussion. But you should do all of the good best practices that we talk about, customizing or tailoring the resume, that kind of thing. In addition to that, it's very good practice, perhaps, if you are applying to multiple roles, is to actually put a cover letter, if you have the capability of doing so, and uploading that with your resume too. So that way you can explain a little bit more about what your direction is, what your intention is, and you might have an opportunity to share a bit more about what you're looking for in that could resonate with the recruiter or the hiring manager that's looking to hire for that role.
Yeah, my thought too is what we talk about with networking, that you're not just applying in a system, but you're trying to figure out who you might know, and that's where that could be very valuable. If there are more positions and you can reach out to the person who's responsible for that position and say, hey, I've applied over here, but I also feel like this one fits me. Getting that personal touch in might be helpful too.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Networking is clearly one of our number one strategies to get you connected. Honestly, there's no universally right or wrong answer to this one. The thing is you have to be focused and clear in your intent. And I think if you do those things, you'll be okay, even if you're applying multiple times.
So that kind of gets into my next question a little bit, in that with applicant tracking systems, do they have the ability, and if they do, how do they kind of incorporate or prioritize, internal referrals or networking referrals, or how does that, and if so, how does that play in with the applicant tracking system?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a very underrated use of the system, and it's also a very underrated use of networking that candidates really should be taking advantage of. So a internal referral type system is a very common feature with I'll use the word today's applicant tracking systems. And that's because organizations feel that referrals are a much higher probability of success because people know them, right? So it's a way of validating that someone might have a good work ethic, they might have the right kinds of experiences, and they're also someone that would fit into the organizational culture much more likely if someone is recommended. So because of those positive things, companies that's one of the reasons they create the internal referral programs, or whatever they might be called internally into an organization, where they actually will give an employee who refers a successful candidate, money for that process. So, and sometimes it can be pretty substantial, in the thousands of dollars in some cases. So it really is an incentive for folks to bring in people they know. How an ATS system typically handles that is that they will flag or tag a candidate profile in the system with the information that they've been referred. In more advanced systems, they will actually tag it with the individual that is making the referral as well. And they do that because they want to make sure that that person gets rewarded at the end of the process if the candidate's hired, of course. So usually that manifests itself in one of two ways, one of which is there is a portal that some companies will have in their own system, and they can give a link to a candidate, and the candidate can kind of come into their portal through this specific link, and it will automatically flag them as someone that's been referred into the organization. Even without that dedicated portal, if you're bringing your resume, and this is the thing with the applicant tracking systems, is a lot of times your resume won't be actually submitting your application in through the system if you're going to be using the referral system. Because what happens in this case is you want the candidate to give the resume to someone in the organization, and then they physically hand carry it to HR or to the hiring manager. And then that system, then they will, inside the business, they will upload your application into the system that way. So it's best to talk to whoever it is that perhaps might be referring you, asking them what their process is, asking them quite bluntly, do you have an employee referral program where you might take advantage of, recommending me, and it's kind of a win-win situation, right? So ultimately, though, the answer is most systems will flag you in some way. And because of that, you will get higher priority in the process with most opportunities.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Good to know. Just reinforces that need to network.
100%.
So recently I had a client who was declined for a position, but she was given the message, we're going to keep your application on file for, I think it was 6 months.
Mhm.
What should she do? Should she sit back and think that that's just going to be picked up when there's a position that fits her? Or should she be reaching out to them, continuing to reach out to them?
Yeah, this is a difficult one because sometimes the ATS systems, when you're moved to a different status in the system, will automatically generate an email to the candidate. If that's the case and you receive sort of this generic, watered down email that has no information about you and the role, then it's likely one of those sort of auto emails that get sent out. That's not a bad thing either, because if you've been rejected for, I'll use the word cause here, right? So if there's something about you that created a red flag and you were eliminated from that process for that reason, it's very unlikely you would get one that says you're going to be kept on file, because it would just say you're not being considered and sort of leave it at that. If it does say that you will be kept on file for 6 months, that means that your interview probably went fine. You just weren't the candidate for that role, but they do see you as a possible candidate for other positions in the company. So if it's a customized response from an HR person, or even if in the best case, right, comes from the hiring manager themselves, then that tells you a lot more about, your potential candidacy down the line for other positions. Generally, though, it's positive. So yes, you should follow up. Always send a thank you. And in fact, when you get their rejection, you should absolutely send a thank you note to them saying, I appreciate being considered. I'd love to be considered for future opportunities. Thank you much for your time, blah, 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 right? The typical note that we would write. So that actually is a way of continuing to nurture that networking opportunity you have with that individual. That, normally it may be the HR person, which is fine. Again, if you can connect with the hiring manager, that would be ideal. But in either case, use it as an opportunity to continue to build and nurture your network, and use it positively. And if you did get it from an individual specifically, you definitely can reach back out to them. I would wait, a reasonable amount of time, and so that you're not appearing desperate. But, 4 to 6 weeks, you could reach back out and say, hey, I just wanted to check in. I'm still interested in if another role similar to this, or maybe something else. If you may have interest in other things, you can certainly use that to reconnect with the person and just reinforce the interest.
Great. That's very helpful. Yeah, because it's kind of that no man's land that you sit in and aren't really sure. But so, we hear so much in the news and on different posts and different sites, and about ATS and ATS is doing this to keep people down, and recruiters are doing. What are some of the myths that you'd like to dispel about recruiters? Not ATS systems, but recruiters. Just
recruiters in this case. All right. Yeah, ATS systems are their own, have sort of their own animal. But recruiters, yeah, one of the things I wasn't so excited about when I became a recruiter is the sort of the negative connotations around the recruiting world. And quite frankly, recruiters deserve a lot of it because we create a lot of our own messes. But I think if everyone knew why those messes were created, they would give recruiters a little bit of leeway on this. And now that I've been living this for 4.5 years, I know the pitfalls that you can fall into quite easily as a recruiter. So I think first of all is that I think we need to know recruiters are people too that are busy individuals working in the workplace. And we have our own challenges with respect to just, keeping up with the workload. So, ghosting is the biggest complaint I hear about recruiters, just as a broad topic. The other is about feedback. So let me touch on both of those. So first of all, recruiters are, as I said, busy people. So if we're working on 10 searches, We have 10 candidates for each of those searches. 9 of those candidates are not going to get the job. You can sort of do the math, right? And we're going to be constantly working these positions, and not to mention working new positions and reaching out to people to do the recruiting ourselves. So the honest answer is that just volume alone doesn't allow us to give feedback to candidates, or sometimes, we're just slow to respond. We are a smaller organization at Heller DeLand, so we work very hard to make sure that we give personalized feedback to everybody. But when you start working with some of these larger firms, you may find that you kind of get lost in the shuffle just by a sense of volume alone. In addition to that, I don't think most people realize that when you give feedback, you are running a little bit of into potentially some legal issues. So what most HR people are trained to do, if they're trained not to actually give feedback, that actually is something that some recruiters are told. We will not give feedback to candidates. If the hiring manager chooses to do so, that's up to them. And the reason they do that is because they don't want someone in their organization to accidentally say something that may not be harmful at all, that someone takes harmfully, and particularly if they write it to them, so that it's documented. So a lot of organizations will tell, their HR people that you're not allowed to give feedback, and that's could be the reason why you're not receiving feedback.
But what about even just the, at least, and this is just my personal, this is not me speaking for anyone else, just my personal. Once you have an interview, I don't even care if it's a screening interview. Once you hit that point, how hard is it to just send a thanks, but no thanks? I'm not even talking feedback. I'm just talking thanks, but no thanks. You get a first round interview, take off work, you go give this, and then ghost. I'm not talking ghosting with an application. I'm talking ghosting once you've been pulled into that interview process. That for me was always just very frustrating, in that just tell me no. I don't care. I mean, that's fine, but just don't leave me hanging. Tell me, something.
Yeah. So Denise, how do you feel about this? I didn't
I'm
sense
sorry.
any
It's one
emotion
of my
about
pet
this at all.
peeves.
Well, honestly, it's a pet peeve of mine too. I was prior to becoming a recruiter, I was in the industry for a long time, and I worked with recruiters. And that honestly is one of the most frustrating aspects of working in job search processes, is just at least knowing where you are in the process, right? So most companies can set their ATS systems up, and they can at least send a notification if their status has been changed. It just depends on how the system's been set up and whether that functionality is live or not. The reality is, honestly, Denise, is that some recruiters are just not nice people, and they just feel like they're not going to do it, and they don't feel like there's any value to it. If you run into, the biggest thing, Denise, is don't take it personally. I'm in every instance, unless you actually have a bad interaction with a recruiter. If you don't have that, it has nothing to do with you personally. It's just that the recruiter has moved on, and because they are busy people. And this isn't a great answer, trust me, I know. Like I said, we endeavor to reach out and talk to all of our candidates, but even I forget to myself, even though I have it as one of my things that I feel like is one of the hallmarks of our organization. So it just happens sometimes by accident too. But ultimately, that would be nice, Denise. And I hope that now that we have, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about AI and how that's going to perhaps change things too. I hope that AI integration into ATS systems will actually at least give us that ability to communicate the status. It may not give us any detail, but it would tell us that we're no longer in the process, for instance, to your point.
And I think that's, yes, it would be great if people could get feedback, but I think people understand the reason why feedback can't be given in a lot of cases. They just want the status. Just don't leave me sitting there for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever. Obviously, you've made a decision or you've moved on from me. Let me know so I can take it off my list and
Yeah, what I would tell candidates in this kind of situation, Denise, is I always have this thing. I kind of distill a lot of things in my life to the rule of threes. And in this case, I would say this applies too. This is what I tell my own coaching clients and in the recruiting world, and when I'm talking at school too, is that reach out 3 times, right? So you should have your first reach out should be after the interaction you've had. So that should be a thank you note reinforcing your interest. And then if you don't hear anything, I would reach out 2 more times. And one of those times I would attempt to make a phone call. If you don't hear from them, I would just mentally say, okay, we're done. I'm moving on to the next thing, and honestly move on. That's where a lot of people struggle with, right? That it's an opportunity and they think somehow that they're still being considered. Unless that job has been put on hold, which does happen, by the way, of course. They likely have moved on from you too. So I would just say, don't sweat it. Learn from the experience as much as you possibly can. After those 2 interactions, right? Try those attempts, but after that, as I said, just move on, and it's going to make you feel better about things too, that you're not dwelling on that.
Yeah, I actually I have an application tracking spreadsheet that I use with my clients that they track everything. Did you remember to send the thank you email? Did you send the LinkedIn connection request? Are you like just the whole
Perfect.
And one of the things on there is as soon as they apply, they set a task reminder for 3 months. And if 3 months comes around, close it, get it off, move it to a closed tab, get it off. Like just forcing themselves to move. So you're not looking at a spreadsheet that's got 100 jobs on it, and then you get discouraged. No, it's only 5 or 10, you know what I mean, that are in that realm of possibility, we'll call it.
Yeah, I think 3 months is pretty healthy. Most jobs take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to get filled. So, that extra time, could factor into, the people could be on vacations, there's changes in the organization, lots of things, lots of dynamics that people don't also consider, because they want these things to happen fast, right? I'm looking for a job and I want the job tomorrow, and not realizing that, especially big companies, it's a big machine. It's the Titanic that you have to turn, right? This is not a cruise ship you have to turn. This is not a dinghy. So there's not a lot of flexibility and adaptability sometimes. So these things just do take, too long, but sometimes just a long time.
Well, I appreciate you letting me vent.
Of course.
Vent there.
Yeah. We just to kind of come back onto the the myths, if you will. I think the other 2 that I would tell you are first of all, the recruiters don't read resumes, so that is relevant to the ATS system, and people thinking that the ATS system is the end all be all. That is absolutely not the case, and we talked a lot about this in the first part. Is that recruiters do read resumes, and they do for lots of reasons. Now, do they skim it? Yes, of course they do. But also, these are people that are trained on what to look for in resumes, which is actually one of the reasons why keeping to a standard format is also important, is that they're trained on a standard resume. And so anything unusual that comes up, you just never know how that's going to hit that individual person. So creativity sometimes can backfire, is what I would tell people. So I love creativity. I love personal branding. You both know that I do, but there's a point where too much is too much. So, a little bit goes a long way with that. But recruiters do read resumes. We often find that the best candidate is not always the best resume writer. So we will take a look at your resume, and if for some reason it didn't score well, but you look like you meet the qualifications, we'll pull it out and take a closer look at it. So, doesn't always happen? No. Because if we've got 10 great candidates that have come through our system, I may not look at all of the resumes with a very critical eye. I may look at them, and I will look at them, but I may not give them a really close look if I already have great candidates to look at. So the last thing I would tell you is be careful with keywords. Don't keyword stuff your resume. You brought it up in terms of having keywords in context. That's going to be really important. But using keywords isn't enough. It absolutely has to be used in context. So you're better off whittling down your skills and abilities kind of list to the things that are very specifically aligned with the role, as opposed to stuffing it with as many things, hoping for the best.
And you just mentioned something, and I know we talked about this in the first interview, is trying to be an early applier.
Yes.
Setting up reminders or setting up things in LinkedIn or whatever, where you're notified of jobs that fit your criteria that posted within the past 24 hours.
Right.
Because again, if 150 people apply in the first week and they find 10 great candidates from that first day, you may be a great candidate that applied a week later, and they may not either get to you, may not even look at it if they've got other really great candidates. So that whole thing of, don't just randomly go out and search for jobs, set up notifications so that you can be an early applier.
Right.
To help your chances as well.
Oh, absolutely. I hate to call it a numbers game, because it really isn't a numbers game. It's a misnomer in this process. But the reality is a job could get 250 applicants. That's sort of the average for, kind of mid to lower level positions, is 250 applications for each of those roles. It does matter when you come into the system, only because of the volume aspect of it more than anything else. Now, if you come in and you're a perfect score, you might sneak in, into the process, but that's not something I'd want to rely on if it were me. So yeah, early bird gets the worm kind of mentality does kind of fit here. It's not a guarantee by any stretch, but certainly it can help you. The last thing I would say to people is that, people give recruiters a bit of a hard time but they need to remember that recruiters are not the one who make the decision on who gets the job. So we're very strong influencers. Even myself as an external recruiter, as opposed to an internal company recruiter, we're influencers, not decision makers. So, we will have a word at the table or a seat at the table so that we can make a comment, but we're not the ones that actually have the final say. So don't shoot the messenger sometimes, and I think if you realize that, but I know it feels good when you do, maybe, but that's certainly not going to help you, with potentially a future opportunity. So remember, we're people. We're also not the final decision maker, and I think you can actually build relationships with recruiters, and they can help you with the process. So it's always good to, it's a nuanced profession, but it's always good to build positive relationships with folks like us.
Be nice to people.
Always.
I've told clients they're your partner. Use them as a partner. Don't use them as the adversary, or the person who's getting in the way of you getting connected to the person who makes the decision. So
yeah, Laura, that's a good point. One thing I might add with that is that when you actually have an opportunity to connect with a recruiter versus applying online, connect with the recruiter first. Be mindful of if there's a deadline on the application process, because that could be a problem if you don't apply in time and the job posting gets pulled down. But if you connect with somebody before you actually apply, particularly in these referral situations that we talked about before, talk to somebody, because there might be a way of actually getting into an organization ahead of the application process. So, basically it's don't rely on one thing in this process. Use all of the tools that you have at your disposal. We always joke everything is not a nail, and you're not a hammer, right? You need to use different things or different approaches for different people and for different positions and things of that sort. So just try to use the right tool for the role. And sometimes you can take advantage of a recruiter or somebody in the organization.
Yep. And along with the tools, and we've mentioned it already a couple of times, if we look in our crystal balls, what do we see or maybe we don't need the crystal ball because things are changing so quickly. What do we see as the future? What changes are coming? New things are coming for ATS and AI?
I think the biggest thing is we're going to see Actually, an ATS system was already sort of an AI system, believe it or not, in terms of a lot of the functionality that it has. But what I can see is the things that we're seeing now with these large language models and things like ChatGPT, these generative AI solutions. These are going to start getting integrated into the the ATS systems very, very soon. In fact, we're already seeing the integration start. One of the things that we have a problem with AI, though, is still a risk of bias. So we hope that will eliminate it, but we know that because these things are trained by information and people who are biased, inevitably that's still going to reside in the systems. But what I do see is that we will get much better integrations. And I think a lot of the conversations that we have about, feedback, at least status updates, for example, I think a lot of these things will start to get automated much more efficiently than we've had them in the past. So you should hopefully start to see more communication from organizations with AI-enabled ATS systems. Will it give you better information? I would say probably not, but now you might actually get information, which is what Denise was talking about before, right? So I think that's one of the things that we're going to see is we're going to start seeing that the integrations are going to make the process a little bit better for everybody, both internally in an organization, but also externally. The candidate experience will be better. I think we'll start to see some interesting things maybe develop with AI too. So we've already started to see the use of video to screen people and use of video to, as part of the application process even. I think we actually might see much more of those going forward to hopefully take a little bit of the heavy lifting on the screening process for the organizations. I think that will start to be a little bit more of it, which you could argue is good or bad. The one thing I will tell you that we have a risk of with AI systems is the fact that these systems are actually now going to go out and start to do research on the candidates earlier in the process. So it has the potential to go find your social media feeds and start to pull in information about you that is publicly available in order to kind of check your network and kind of what you're doing. Most organizations do this sort of manually anyway. Once you get to a certain point in the process, they will check your social media stuff and how you present there. And then if a red flags show up, but I think the AI systems are actually going to start doing these now proactively. And in addition to that, I think you're going to start to see chatbots and virtual assistants show up in this process too, which again will help for transparency on status and things like that. But I don't know how well it'll be received by the candidate community. We'll have to see, when those start to get implemented. So I think that we will see an improvement with AI and its integrations. And so I feel really comfortable that, that's going to go in the right direction, but I'm quite a big AI fan. So that's why I do see it as a positive from my own perspective.
Fantastic. Well, this is really, as Denise said, I have a lot of ahas from this and from our last section. So that wraps up part 2 of our in-depth interview with Arthur Hughes on applicant tracking systems and what they mean for your career journey. From the ins and outs of resume formats, the mysterious world of parsed content, to the burning questions around data security. We've covered it all. We even dug deep into some recruiter etiquette, like how to handle applying for multiple positions at the same company and what to make of those cryptic "will keep you on file" messages. So as is our aim with Career Experts Group, we are focused on empowering you with tools, insights, and strategies, the strategies you need to not just navigate, but truly excel in your career, whether you're a fresh graduate or a seasoned executive. So don't forget to check out our November newsletter, Your Career, Your Future, geared towards celebrating National Career Development Month. We dive deeper into trends and tips, and yes, even more tricks to make sure you stay at the top of your game. We want to extend a huge thank you to Arthur Hughes for once again demystifying the world of ATS and for us. And it's knowledge like this, Arthur, that that can turn what often feels like an obstacle course into a smooth pathway toward our career milestones. Until next time, keep climbing that career ladder and making the most of every opportunity. Stay tuned, stay empowered, and most of all, stay inspired. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Excuse me. And you're just such a font of incredible information. And we greatly appreciate you taking the time
Yeah,
to
I'm
share
glad.
that knowledge.
Oh, I'm glad to help in any way I can. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, now you can stop recording. We can pull that.
That's right. I forgot that I'm the one recording.